Africa had suffered from colonialism at the hands of Europe, but colonialism was sped up rapidly by the Industrial Revolution. In fact, the first machine guns were invented in order to kill African native people, because at the time they had guns that required you to reload, and so that was good for shooting one or two people. But if a crowd of Africans who don't want to be enchained and enslaved are charging at you, you can't reload, and so they invented the first version of what was later reproduced as the U.S. Gatling gun, which was a gun you put up on your wagon if you're a European settler, and you crank it, and it shoots and shoots and shoots as the bullets come through. One interesting fact is that Belgium had colonized the Congo for a lengthy period, and during one period when King Leopold ruled Belgium, at least 7 million people were killed in a matter of 5 to 10 years.
How many?
7 to 10 million. And in a matter of 5 to 10 years, that many people were killed in Belgium at the time. And Belgium was made, it wasn't even made into a colony proper of Belgium. It was a personal tract of land owned by King Leopold, right? And he wanted to clear it, and so he made all the local people work in, plantations.
Rubber.
In rubber. And if they didn't work fast enough, their hands were removed, and then their legs were removed, and they were just killed, right? It was, a massive genocide. And as of yet, there's only been one widely circulated book on the subject. And that shows how much the imperialist academia cares about documenting the crimes done against African people. But all the European powers, carved up parts of Africa for their own taking. Portugal had certain sections. Britain had certain sections. France, largely colonized West Africa. And the only section of Africa that was never actually colonized and formally colonized by a European power was Ethiopia. And so you'll know that in 1935, that was the country that, in order to flex his muscles, dictator Benito Mussolini sent troops to invade. Ethiopia had been a historically Christian country, and the only country in the world to object loudly to the invasion of Ethiopia was the Soviet Union, right? And there were mass demonstrations all across the world by communist parties, hands off Ethiopia.
Yes.
Kind of an interesting note is in Chicago, the demonstration was banned, hands off Ethiopia, but they still had it anyway. And the mayor of Chicago declared the march to be anti-Italian racism. And he would not permit hate speech against the great Italian population of Chicago, which at that time included Al Capone. And so they had their demonstration regardless, 400,000 people. In order to prevent the stage at the rally from being commandeered by the police, what they did is instead they had instead of having just a podium and a stage, they got a hotel and they got the balcony. They got a room with a balcony. And so they had the speakers go out on the balcony of the hotel while they had a whole crowd of people inside the hotel room barricading the doors shut as the police tried to bust their way in. So that was the hands off Ethiopia, and that's rather interesting in light of Bush, when he was trying to make the case for the war in Iraq, comparing everyone who disagreed it with those who appeased Hitler, right?
Yeah.
And some people wouldn't let us go and defend Ethiopia from the fascists, and as if appeasement were based on pacifism or something. Appeasement was based on U.S. support for fascism.
As I've mentioned before, one of the first chants that I remember from May Day parade as a child was "Hands Off Ethiopia," and that was when I was 7 years old in 1935.
Wow.
So the only one that was earlier was Free Tom Mooney and the Scottsboro Boys, and that was the year before. But Hands Off Ethiopia was...
Africa, specifically North Africa, has a commodity that the imperialists very much like, and that's called oil. Sudan, Libya are very oil-rich areas, as well as Nigeria, which is in West Africa. But the imperialists very much liked that. And a big factor in World War II is there was an entire stage in Africa, which was the Western powers battling the Nazis for control of Africa. They called Rommel, the Nazi general, the Desert Fox, because in northern Africa he was doing battle with the Allied powers for control of Africa's oil resources. And a lot of people will claim, and with much evidence, that the only reason the U.S. was successful in winning World War II was its control of the oil resources. That if the Nazi regime had control of the Middle Eastern and African oil resources from the beginning, they very well could have won the war. But regardless, South Africa. Now, one of the first communist parties formed in the world, right? At the first meeting of the Communist International was the South African Communist Party.
No kidding.
Yes. 1919, they founded the Communist International, and there was CPUSA, there was Communist Party of Great Britain, and there was the Communist Party of South Africa, which was a multiracial group. And though South Africa had been under British dominion, many South Africans, politically, white South Africans, who were the ruling caste, aligned themselves with Nazi Germany. And until the 80s, the South African major party was the Nationalist Party, which was for apartheid, which was openly white supremacist and openly pro-Nazi and openly Holocaust denying, straight up. And over on the table, there's a good book on Mozambique, which was a colony of Portugal. And it describes the details, which were universal to colonized African countries until the revolutionary movements took hold, in which basically it was required that you have a job working for a corporation of Western control. And if you didn't have a job, that was vagrancy. So you'd be arrested for being unemployed, and then you'd be worked for free as a prisoner for the Western corporation. And basically, there's quotes from these leaders, whether it's Mozambique or Rhodesia, as they called Zimbabwe before the revolution, that the only reason the black man exists is to serve us. And so if he's not working for us, he's a criminal, and he'll be put in jail. So the South African revolutionary movement, the organization that was formed to combat the apartheid system in South Africa was the African National Congress. And the African National Congress, it was a multi-class force. It had various different figures within it, and it was largely based on the concept of a popular front, or a class unity against the main enemy. Especially since there were so many fascists in South Africa. The idea was to build a unity with liberal capitalists and liberal white settlers to fight against fascism. And so, and especially in 1956, when Khrushchev got up and announced his program of the three peacefuls, peaceful competition between socialist and capitalist countries, peaceful coexistence, no war between, and peaceful transition from capitalism to socialism. When that was announced, the ANC made a big point of not engaging in armed struggle. So in 1960, a faction within the ANC who had been loyal to China left on the basis that it was right to rebel, and they sided with Mao Zedong, arguing that they had the right to begin armed struggle against the South African government, which they viewed as a fascist regime. And so that was the original basis of the split. Now, the difference is, especially later when the ANC launched its own armed faction, became a little more acute. But throughout Africa, now, Ethiopia was an interesting case as well. Ethiopia was ruled by the absolute monarch, Haile Selassie, who had absolute power, and there was a region in Ethiopia that tried to secede on a national basis. It was, thank you, and Eritrea, tried to secede on a nationalist basis, and Haile Selassie was funded by the CIA and pumped to put down the Eritrean resistance movement. But in 1974, a movement of patriotic officers in the Ethiopian military who were loyal to Ethiopia, not the United States and not the Western capitalist powers, rose up and overthrew the absolute monarch Haile Selassie, and began to proclaim their goal was to create a socialist society in Ethiopia. And they were largely associated with Fidel Castro.